Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. I was just watching a debate on YouTube that was from Adam Kokesh and Webster Tarpley. Adam Kokesh is, of course, a libertarian running for president in 2020, and Dr. Webster Tarpley is a kind of former historical conspiracy theorist. Now he's just a political activist with his own group. But they brought up the concept of Ludwig von Mises being a plant of the Rockefeller Foundation, because the plant of the Rockefeller family. The Rockefellers completely supported Mises. There's a much larger theory that goes on online that Friedrich von Hayek, kind of the person whom we associate most closely with Austrian economics, the Austrian School of Political Economy, was a personal tutor to the Rockefeller family, that he was indeed, just as I said, the personal tutor to the Rockefeller family. That one I had heard before, but this was the first time that I ever heard anyone mention that Ludwig von Mises was, completely supported by the Rockefellers. What the people like Dr. Tarpley and other, just other progressives, I would say, really try to instill this notion that the entirety of libertarian thought and the entirety of the Austrian School of Political Economy were all created by global elites, by plutocrats, by just these sort of people in very high positions of economic and or financial power solely to expand their own power. This is not only perpetrated by Dr. Tarpley, it's perpetrated as well by Bernie Sanders, mind you. He posted a lot of this on his website during the 2016 election. Tom Hartman is another enormous believer in all of these things, but I've heard him specifically address more closely the Koch brothers and their role in the creation of the Libertarian Party, or just to say that the Koch brothers really put forward an agenda with the Cato Institute. The Charles Koch Foundation went on to become the Cato Institute, and David Koch, of course, running for president on the vice presidential ticket, to be precise, in 1980. Well, what's really going on is someone like Ludwig von Mises, who, this Austrian economist whose name is now on the Mises Institute's, namesake. Is he actually a Rockefeller plant? Did the Rockefellers actually come up with this whole notion of libertarianism and Austrian economics? What really is going on? Well, I decided to look for some counterbalance after going, through this debate between Kokesh and Tarpley, and I found an article from Tom Woods. I tune in to Tom Woods from time to time. He's a very entertaining radio host. I can't say I'm a regular listener, but he has a lot of uploads on YouTube. He's an enormous fan of Ludwig von Mises, and what he wrote was that the conspiracy theory that Mises was supported by the Rockefeller family is just a LaRouchian conspiracy. And by LaRouchian, we are, of course, referring to the Lyndon LaRouche political movement, who has their own views on economics, their own views on history, their own views on science, and even music as well. Webster Tarpley is a former member of the Lyndon LaRouche movement, leaving it sometime during the 90s. And, I digress from that anyway. But the point is that this is something that comes to us from a lot of progressives and some smaller groups like the LaRouche movement, that people like Mises and Austrians and libertarians are all just created purely to benefit the financial elites. Well, some of the things that I thought were very interesting that Tom Woods put forward in his article were that, first of all, he didn't deny it. That's a very interesting thing to say. What he wrote was that Mises had these ideas before the Rockefellers, and furthermore, after Mises disassociated from the Rockefeller family, he held on to these ideas. Yes, at one time he was indeed funded financially by the Rockefellers through, grants, but after he was no longer funded by them, he continued to espouse the same material. He continued to promote the same school of thinking. And I believe what Tom Woods is trying to say is that it is possible that Mises, just happened to be somebody who came up with his own original work that had his own original ideas, and he was only promoting this because he genuinely believed it. So furthermore, he's not like a shill or a fraud or a plant or something like that. And the second thing that is kind of really put forward is that, if you really want to know, are they saying these things because they are beneficial? Well, what Tom Woods kind of is trying to argue is that it was normal for many people in, the European intellectual communities to receive support from larger foundations. This is kind of the entire notion of receiving a grant, from a foundation and such. So, once again, I thought it was just very interesting that Tom Woods didn't deny this stuff. He didn't be like, was Ludwig von Mises a plant for the Rockefeller family? A lot of people would probably just be like, no, he wasn't, if they were trying to counter-argue. Instead, what he said was, yeah, there was a time he was supported by the Rockefellers, but so what? He also disassociated with the Rockefellers. He wasn't any sort of lifelong... This wasn't any sort of lifelong material that was going on. There was just a period of his life when he received money from them through grants, and he never changed his platform. He never changed his ideas. He didn't just do, sort of the typical politician stuff. Today they support this, tomorrow they support that. Well, I just thought it was a very interesting kind of approach, and it sounds like there's somewhat of a genuine, kind of like a genuine spin that Tom Woods put on that. So maybe this is actually something where people are kind of reading too much into it, but let's look at kind of a larger issue that Tom Woods discusses in his article. He says that it is just sort of a completely flawed statement to say that the global elites, the financial elites, the economically well-off, whatever you'd like to call them, benefit from libertarian ideas. Because you have to note this about the LaRouche movement and people like Webster Tarpley, who's with the Tax Wall Street Party now. What they say is that the single largest entity that is ripping people off are the megabanks. Well, who created the megabanks? Well, the financial elites. Libertarians are completely opposed to things, like megabanks. Because megabanks work so much with the government. Isn't that the whole thing? So, these people are saying that the megabanks are controlling the government, but then they're saying that, libertarian policies about small government are going to benefit the megabanks. It's like, a lot of these things are they can be going in circles and somewhat. Mind you, I'm only trying to articulate what Tom Woods has put forward. So, it's a very difficult thing to kind of actually get to the bottom of, and just from kind of examining the sort of, article from a commentary perspective, I was just very surprised that he came out kind of from the gate and was just like, yes, someone, Ludwig von Mises, who was enormously instrumental in the libertarian movement of the 20th century and into the 21st century. So many people speak highly of the Mises Institute. Dr. Ron Paul is very big and fan of them. One of his staffers is running the Mises Institute currently. And not to mention, they have a very large influence on libertarian thought, and Mises, is somebody who libertarians really look toward. But I really wanted to it was the first time I'd ever heard anyone actually just say that Mises was funded by the Rockefellers, and I just tried to kind of look at this from a little bit, kind of like the opposite perspective, and Tom Woods, didn't even deny it. He's just like, yeah, he received money from the Rockefeller family for a little while, but it's no big deal. Lots of people did that. It was very normal for, people in the kind of Viennese intellectual circles to do things of this nature. Well, when you kind of come at it from that perspective, what he's sort of saying is, I think everyone's kind of in consensus that Mises was someone who was working for the Rockefellers for a particular amount of time, but I don't necessarily know how much I can accept the argument that the mega banks wouldn't accept something such as the Libertarian Party. What a lot of people are trying to say is that the mega banks want stuff like libertarianism because it means no taxes and it means kind of more control, that massively strong financial entities can just kind of buy up anything they want without any sort of question, even if it's just like land and water resources. And the Koch brothers platform in 1980, that during the vice president, when David Koch was running as the vice president, included things such as privatizing rivers. So, not to mention, this is also, I shouldn't say horribly, this is largely instrumental, with people like Milton Friedman, who kind of come into it in the 20th century. So many things drive these huge, enormous influences on this sort of small government, low taxation, or no taxation libertarian schools of thought. I'm not completely convinced that I can say that libertarianism does not support things like megabank entities, because that's all about free trade. But what we can sort of say is that, the whole notion, the LaRouche movement does put forward this thing that the megabanks are the things that are controlling the world. Well, the world, essentially the British School of Political Economy, i.e. megabanks that are, receiving orders from global elites sitting around a table, that this is controlling the world. But at the same time, libertarians are opposed to all that. They're opposed to that sort of thing. And that much I do agree with, that libertarians would be opposed to people controlling the government, so they want to make government smaller. Then you would just sort of have, more people who are able to make decisions based on free trade, free thought, free anything you want. What I can say is that there's somewhat of a balance in this discussion. I think over the next couple of years, we're going to be hearing from a lot more libertarians. I am not one myself, but I think we're going to be hearing kind of a larger discussion on what is going to be the future of the Libertarian Party in the 21st century. On the one hand, it seems like they're growing bigger. On the other hand, it seems like the criticism to them is growing much bigger as well. And I think that people like Ludwig von Mises are very instrumental when it comes to the expansion of the Libertarian Party in the 21st century, because he's one of the icons that they look toward. Friedrich von Hayek, maybe Milton Friedman, depending on your perspective, and of course Ludwig von Mises, hence Austrian this, Austrian that. He's part of that. So it's like, we really have to just kind of question some of these things. And what we can say is that it seems like Ludwig von Mises did have support from the Rockefellers. But does that mean that he is someone who created all of his work for the Rockefeller family? Does that mean that, he was just sort of a shill? No, absolutely not. Does that mean that the Rockefeller family wanted him because they thought his policies would be beneficial to them, or his school of thought, his ways of thinking would be beneficial to them? It's possible, but, that involves a lot of calculation and foresight and anticipating of the future, which, I don't know, are these people super geniuses? Well, no. That's also another thing that goes into these historical conspiracies. They actually think that the global elites are really stupid. That's why there's so many calamities in the world. But, what we can say is, though, it seems like he did have kind of a relationship and a back and forth with them. He did have support from them for a while. Does that mean that he is a Rockefeller plant and he was a shill? I'm not completely convinced. I think it's much more fascinating to kind of debate about how much of an influence he had on the Libertarian Party and what's going to happen with the Libertarian Party in the future. Just a little rant. Kind of messy today, but, well, that's that.